Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. It is official. Republicans swept the entire election, winning the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. Ironically, this puts Donald Trump in a much stronger position than if Joe Biden had not stolen the 2020 election. Means Trump has at least 2 years of a friendly Congress to get his people appointed and his policies passed. Still, the majorities are narrow. It looks like 53 Republicans in the Senate. You need 50 for control when you have the veep, and maybe 221 in the House, where you need 218. So that's plus 3 in the Senate, plus 3 in the House, which is very narrow historically. That means left-wing Republicans, RINOs, can absolutely gum things up. More on that in a minute. So there's 3 moving parts to the Republic: the President, the Senate, and the House. The President administers the federal government. They don't make laws. They're just supposed to enforce the laws passed by Congress. Of course, there is a lot a president can get away with using executive actions, but major changes need Congress. Now, new laws and budgets start in the House and have to be passed by the Senate. They usually negotiate back and forth. On top of approving laws, the Senate also approves presidential appointments, which includes cabinets and Supreme Court justices. The Senate also votes on international treaties, although it is the president who withdraws from treaties like Trump did with the global warming accords. So at least on paper, Trump has got a clear road for his dream policies: the economy, taxes and regulations, the border, election security. But there is a rub. So RINOs, the spineless Republican uniparty shills. Because while Democrats tend to vote in near lockstep, the Republican Party is currently undergoing a metamorphosis from elite control to populist, meaning there are still a lot of holdover RINOs. That gummed up Trump last time. Since 2016, Trump also got a sweep that was solid in the House at 241, but very narrow in the Senate at 52. Moreover, there were 7 senators who were broadly anti-Trump, many of them quite public about it. That meant the party had 52, but Trump only had 45 he could count on. That meant he could not pass major reforms. Now, this time, most of those RINOs are gone, but we're still looking at between 3 and 6 who are not very reliable. Happily, 94% of Republican voters just chose MAGA, meaning we, the voters, are going to have to keep the pressure on the RINOs, starting with the GOP Senate leadership election in 2 days, which pits MAGA-friendly Rick Scott against 2 RINOs, John Thune and John Cornyn. Outgoing leader McConnell is trying to make it a secret ballot to shut out voters, but if we swamp Senate offices, he will back down. Still, even with dead-end RINOs, Trump's in a much better spot than he was in 2016, because at this point, Republican voters have shown elected officials that they will walk on hot coals for the man, meaning a RINO would have to be brain dead to go against 94% of his constituents. So what's next? While it was a heck of an election for patriots, the Republican Party still has uniparty elements who will choose donors over Trump, so we will need constant voter pressure. Happily, these people believe in nothing. They will respond to pressure. Constituents have to be that pressure. As for those RINOs, I know their staff watch these videos. Trump just got 94% of Republican voters. The old party is dead. Join or get out of the way. Mass deportations are coming, which feels about right given we're a democracy. Nearly 60% of Americans want mass deportation of illegals who are, after all, breaking the law by trespassing on our republic. So how fast and who goes first? After Joe Biden's communist handlers let perhaps 20 million illegals into our country, many of them murderers and rapists because sadly some countries did not send their best, Donald Trump has now promised the largest mass deportation in U.S. history. Now, the current record holder is Franklin D. Roosevelt, who deported 2 million overwhelmingly Mexican immigrants. I mentioned in a recent video how FDR's deportations included citizen children of illegals, so that is perfectly legal. They will pretend it is not. The active deportations will start with criminals and will essentially be arrests. But the real magic happens in the background, the self-deportations. I mentioned in a recent video how up to 90% of FDR's deportations were actually self-deportations because they didn't want to get arrested on the way out. Today, we'd be looking at 15 million self-deportations if that pattern holds. Now, Wall Street Silver recently suggested some ways to get these self-deportations rolling, including cutting all financial benefits from food stamps to rent subsidies, from free apartments to Obama phones. This would, of course, free up resources for, say, homeless combat veterans. Next, cancel the so-called temporary refugee status that hands out work permits like candy and is apparently killing the pets in Springfield. Then the big one, crack down on employers who hire illegals. Now, that is already illegal with up to 6 months in prison, but it is not enforced. Next up is the border to both stop the flow of new entrants and ensure deportations are not a revolving door. Donald Trump plans to finish his wall, of course, and to restore his Remain in Mexico policy that makes illegals stay in Mexico while they're being processed, which can take years. After all, beggars do not get free caviar, and a true refugee should be perfectly happy with Mexico, which is a country over 1 million Americans retired to. In case Mexico does not play ball, Trump is threatening a 25% tariff on everything Mexico exports to us if they do not get illegal immigration under control. So Mexico may not pay for the wall, they will be the wall. Beyond deportations, Trump wants more screenings for immigrants so we can continue to attract the best and brightest without getting swamped by criminals and welfare cases. Ideally, we would replace our current bubblegum and baling wire immigration system with a point system like Japan uses, where you get points for education, income, career achievements, and age, so you're not a burden on the health system. Prove enough points and you're in, fail, and you are out for good. Finally, what does mass deportation do to the economy? In short, millions of jobs open up for Americans, along with millions of houses. The Americans will get higher wages, lower rents, and of course, we're not spending hundreds of billions on welfare for illegals. Inflation and GDP depend on the magnitude, so how high are the wages, how low are the rents, how many people leave, and what were they contributing, if anything. So what's next? Mass deportations will begin once Trump takes office, starting with criminals. For the rest, simply enforcing existing law will, going by history, do almost all the work. As for those who refuse to go, the American military has 1.5 million men. They would probably love to get a mission that actually does protect the country. A word from our lead sponsor, Unchained.com. An IRA is an investment vehicle that can save you a lot of taxes. With Unchained, you can hold real Bitcoin in your IRA, and it's the only company where you hold the keys and can verify that your Bitcoin is not being relent like banks do. We've recently seen futures-based ETFs underperform holding your own Bitcoin, so why settle for less? Sign up today at unchained.com/Bitcoin-IRA. If you own gold, you've probably been very happy with prices hitting all-time highs. But your gold can do more than just go up. It can generate passive income for you. With monetary metals, you can earn up to 5% interest on your gold and silver, paid in more ounces. Credit investors can even achieve double-digit returns in their bond offerings. All interest is paid in ounces of gold and silver stored in your account free of charge. If your metal is gathering dust at home or costing storage fees in a vault, it's time to start putting your metal to work with Monetary Metals. Visit monetary-metals.com/Peter today to learn more. Now back to our show. The Wall Street Journal is speculating Donald Trump may fire Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Powell says he will not go. Can the president fire a Fed chair? And if not, who is running the Federal Reserve? So Donald Trump appointed Jerome Powell in 2017 and has pretty much been at war with him ever since. Powell was appointed on the recommendation of his friend Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, a former hedge funder. Powell himself is not actually an economist. He worked in private equity, which normally buys up companies and sells them for parts. But Powell worked for a conspiracy theorist's wet dream, the Carlyle Group, featured in Fahrenheit 9/11 as the poster child of the crony military-industrial complex. It's a big club, and Trump was new to the game. At any rate, just 9 months in, Trump already wanted Powell gone because Powell was raising interest rates when inflation was 2.5 points. Higher rates, slow growth, and Trump had promised growth. Once COVID hit, of course, rates went to zero, so it was all moot. Now, fast forward to today, with Trump musing during the campaign that rates are too high, which is strangling the economy and squeezing families. Of course, Powell is doing this because the alternative is to control inflation by cutting government spending instead. So can Trump fire Powell and get the Fed chair of his dreams? Now, presidents cannot outright fire Fed chairs unless it's for cause, meaning they're corrupt or they go to Diddy parties. But they can demote them to regular Fed governors who have a lot less power. But that requires an open seat, which doesn't happen until early 2026, which is a few months before Powell's term as chair ends anyway. So there might not be that much point. Now, of course, Congress could always create an open seat, effectively packing the Fed, in which case Trump could demote Powell today and appoint a new chair. So he sort of could, but the other question is, should he? So there's the surface question, should rates go lower, which depends how far away we are from recession and whether Trumponomics will head off that recession. But the more important question is, why do we have a system where Fed chairs cannot be fired? After all, we live in a republic where politicians are the voice of the voters. If a Fed chair is independent of presidents, it means he is independent of voters. In which case, who exactly does the Fed answer to? JP Morgan, Citigroup. Indeed, Ron Paul has pointed out the Fed has less oversight than the CIA. So Fed chairs can and do refuse to answer oversight questions from Congress, which would obviously get a CIA director fired, something presidents very much can do. This is incidentally true of all modern central banks. They are intentionally set up to be independent of voters, allegedly because voters like inflation, but possibly because the purpose of a central bank is to print money and hand it to bankers, governments, big corporations, and rich people, none of which is very popular with voters. In fact, voters might shut it down, the money printing, and even the central bank itself. So what's next? Whether or not Powell sticks around, the fight raises an important question: why precisely our economy is manipulated by a private corporation, the Fed, that's not only unconstitutional, but explicitly does not answer to voters. Government shouldn't be manipulating the economy in the first place, but doing it independent of voters amounts to an economic occupation. Are they handing Donald Trump cooked books on the economy? Fresh inflation numbers came out yesterday saying inflation is rising, yet the Federal Reserve is expected to keep cutting rates, perhaps because the job market is so weak. In other words, stagflation, served up on a silver platter for Donald Trump. As my friend and financial analyst Ed Dowd put it, Trump is, quote, inheriting a turd of an economy, but at least they had joy doing it. So first the numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released their latest inflation number, saying year-on-year inflation rose to 2.6% last month, which is the highest since July. The biggest jumps were housing and medical, so stuff you need. More concerning, core inflation, which excludes food and energy since they bounce around, is running at a 3.5% annual rate, which is up from under 8% back in June when left-wing media was declaring mission accomplished on inflation. In fact, core was almost as high as back in September of 2023 when Paul Krugman infamously cobbled together an inflation chart excluding everything you actually buy. So it was literally CPI, X food, X energy, X housing, and X used cars, and then concluded, quote, the war on inflation is over, we won. So that takes core to 53 straight months of rises, and it is a new record high. Congratulations, Jerome. Now, what made yesterday's inflation jump interesting is the odds of a Fed rate cut actually increased on the jump, going from 60% chance in December to an 80% chance of a cut. That's odd because rate cuts make inflation go faster. So rising inflation is supposed to reduce the odds of a rate cut. So why would the Fed be cutting rates into rising inflation? One possibility is the Fed knows that they are handing Donald Trump a turd on a platter. They know that bureaucratically fortified jobs numbers, GDP numbers, and inflation numbers have all been lovingly massaged going into the election. Now, with the election passed and Donald Trump set to catch the blame, the gates swing open on those terrifying statistical revisions, just in time for the New York Times to queue up some ChatGPT articles to feed their vengeful subscribers. Indeed, for a while now, the Fed has seemed deeply skeptical of the Joe Biden miracle. Back in June, Powell unsettled markets, saying the jobs data, quote, may be a bit overstated. Then in September, the Fed pulled out a jumbo half-point cut, which is something it only does in recessions. That was despite real GDP allegedly cruising along at a robust 2.8%. Interestingly enough, pre-election, my esteemed colleague Richard Stern built a model using inflation, real GDP, and a cycle dummy to predict who would win. The model was perfect going back to the founding of the Federal Reserve, nailing 26 out of 26 elections. And the model said Kamala would win easy if you plug in official numbers. But once you plug in real-world inflation, which is almost double, suggesting we are already in recession, the model instead predicted a Trump win. So 26 out of 26 says, yes, they are handing Trump cooked books. So what's next? The $64,000 question for the economy is whether Trump can stop or even reverse the coming recession. The very one the Fed flagged with this jumbo cut. If, in fact, the books are cooked, Trump has a very deep hole to dig out of. A word from our sponsor. If you run a business and you're looking to get customers excited about your loyalty and reward program, you can now implement Bitcoin rewards with Oshi Loyalty. You get all the perks of a full-featured loyalty and rewards program with real Bitcoin rewards every time your customers shop, refer, and engage. Boost customer retention, loyalty, and lifetime value. And if you're looking for Bitcoin rewards when you shop, check out the dozens of companies at the Oshi Marketplace at oshi.tech/shop. Start earning Bitcoin today. Now back to our show. In a very satisfying headline, CNN is reporting a widespread, quote, feeling of dread among the million-strong federal bureaucracy that Donald Trump will fire them. In case you're curious why they used your tax dollars to try and steal an election. CNN kicks off how the federal workforce is, quote, on edge and bracing for the likelihood its ranks will be purged. We can only hope. In particular, they're terrified Trump will impose an executive order known as Schedule F, which would give him the power to hire and fire tens of thousands of bureaucrats who are in a, quote, policy determining or policy advocating position. Estimates range between those tens of thousands up to 50,000, which is a solid start to draining the swamp, particularly given policy advocating bureaucrats are the mothership of deep state resistance. CNN breathlessly calls it the biggest change since 1883, which is when the modern independent bureaucracy, the deep state, was born. Now, mass firings won't happen on day one for a couple reasons. First, the left and the deep state will deploy lawfare on a mass scale to shield the bureaucrats who feed them grant money so they can riot. Lawfare means it's got to be done very carefully. Second, because Trump doesn't necessarily have to fire all 50,000. The mere threat that he could fire them will concentrate minds among otherwise hostile bureaucrats clutching their gold-plated benefits and pensions. For this, we can look back to one of the greatest presidents in American history, Andrew Jackson. By the way, Trump kept a bust of Jackson right behind him in the Oval Office his first term, so he does pay attention to history. Now, Jackson, like Trump, was a populist up against near-universal opposition among the elite and the federal workforce. Of course, in 1830, it was a much smaller government with roughly 5,000 federal employees, since there was no income tax and no Federal Reserve. Still, they were united in opposition to the populist Jackson. So how did he win them over? Easy. He fired about 1 in 5. The rest fell in line. Now, given Elon Musk wants to cut $1 in $3 from the federal budget in his Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, we may be looking at even better numbers. Meaning even that dreaded Schedule F is merely the first sentence of the first chapter of a wholesale government retreat in the face of the people. Now, going by Trump 1.0, the bureaucrats will fight everything they've got using a raft of civil service privileges imposed over the past century. But the Constitution is very clear. Article 2, Section 1 vests all executive power in one single person, the sitting president. The two main Supreme Court cases that interpret it said he can fire any political appointment, that's Myers 1926, and a 1935 case, Humphrey's executor, saying he can fire anybody in a so-called executive agency, which is nearly 97% of federal workers. Put them together, and the Constitution says whatever pretty laws Congress passes to shield bureaucrats from voters, Trump can fire roughly 2.9 million out of the 3 million federal workers. Beyond the opportunity to use former bureaucrats to pick fruit when illegals go home, a 97% headcount reduction should give Elon lots to work with on his way to cutting $2 trillion in spending. So what's next? In many ways, Trump 1.0 got played by the deep state, but their sheer savagery these past 4 years has opened his eyes. Millions of deep state minions are now right to feel a deep sense of dread as they dust off the resume and consider what useful things they might do in life. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.